My name is Sanjay. I'm 52 years old and work as a technical supervisor at Delhi International Airport. It's not a job you just fall into. You need a soul attuned to the rhythm of machines, their metallic hum, their demand for precision. You learn to respect both sky and earth, because a single missed screw or overlooked pressure reading can lead to disaster. For me, airplanes were never just metal. They felt alive, suspended between two realms. And I was their quiet guardian, the last set of eyes before takeoff. On June 13, 2025, I was assigned the final inspection of a Boeing 787. With my digital checklist in hand, I walked over for the usual pre-check. Just one last look before the internal team stepped in. But as I approached the belly of the plane, something felt off. A weight pressed on my chest, like a brick lodged under my sternum. My breath caught. I pushed forward, but then a sharp pain hit my left arm, then my back. Sweat poured from my forehead, cold and sudden like winter air. I tried to ignore it, to shake it off, but not this time. My focus slipped. The turbine's sound faded. I reached for the ladder, but my hands missed. My legs buckled. I collapsed. The sky flipped. My colleagues' voices grew faint, distant, like echoes in a dream. Someone shouted my name. Then, nothing. A deep darkness, not cold, but heavy. A silence unlike anything I'd ever known. No sounds, no thoughts, no weight. Just an eerie lightness, as if my soul had quietly detached from my body. I was dead. I knew it with a certainty that needed no confirmation. There was no fear, only a sense of suspension. But as my consciousness detached from the world, another scene flashed through me like lightning. I saw the same plane I was about to inspect, the Boeing 787, but no longer stationary on the tarmac. I saw it in flight, and then in flames. I saw it break apart in the sky, over a landscape I didn't recognize, but which felt strangely familiar. I saw it plummet amidst screams and fire, and a voice within me whispered, "It is today. It is now." I woke up in a place no one could ever describe with human words. But that vision, that brief and tremendous anticipation, remained etched in me like an open wound. I still didn't know where I had ended up. I still hadn't understood what was about to be shown to me. But I sensed that it wasn't a simple heart attack, and that what was happening in the world had a much deeper root than mechanics or medicine. Something had begun. Something that would forever change the way I see the world. I don't know how to precisely describe what happened after my heart stopped beating, because it wasn't a dream, nor a hallucination, nor a complete detachment from my body as some mystical tales describe it. It was something more real than reality itself, as if everything I had ever touched, seen, or breathed on earth had only been a pale imitation of what I was now experiencing. I was conscious, lucid, but I no longer had a material body, yet I didn't miss it. It was as if I had returned to my original essence, to the part of me that had always existed, but which I had always ignored, buried under worries, work, the expectations of others, and the noise of the world. The first thing I perceived was a light, not like that of the sun or a lamp, but a living, pulsating light that didn't blind me, but embraced me. A light that illuminated not only the space around me, but also my thoughts, my memories, even my faults. And it was in the midst of that light that I saw him. I cannot lie. At first I didn't recognize him, because it wasn't the image of Jesus I had seen in Christian books or films. It wasn't the white, bearded face I had associated with the religion of others. He was a man, yes, but not just a man. He was majestic, but not threatening. He exuded authority and sweetness together. His eyes didn't just look at me, they penetrated me. And as he looked at me, I felt myself being seen in every corner of my being, as if my every action, every thought, every omission or compromise were laid bare at that precise moment. Yet there was no condemnation in his eyes, only truth. A truth that did not seek to humble me, but to free me. I heard my name, Sanjay, pronounced with a voice that seemed to come not from outside, but from within me. And the moment I heard my name spoken by him, I understood that everything I had believed until that day, all my certainties, all my distance from that foreign figure, were collapsing. Jesus was real. Jesus was alive. He was the Lord of time and eternity, the Son of the living God. And at that moment I understood with a sweet and poignant anguish that he had known me my whole life, even when I wanted to know nothing of him. Without him saying a word, the scene changed before me as if reality were being turned inside out, like a page silently turning over. I saw a plane, but it was no longer on the tarmac at Delhi Airport. It was in flight, high but fragile. It was the Boeing 787, the one I was supposed to work on, or rather, an identical one, and although the scene was set in a place I didn't immediately recognize, I knew deep down it was India. It was today. It was the same day as my death. I saw the plane break apart, ignite the sky, shatter among the clouds, as if an invisible force had torn it from within. I saw the fire, the debris, the bodies, the pain. But what was shown to me immediately afterward was infinitely more disturbing. It wasn't just metal, smoke, and flames. It was as if the skin of the world tore open for a moment, revealing what hides behind every tragedy. I saw dark, undefinable, yet clearly conscious forms, moving like smoke endowed with will. They weren't simply presences, they were entities, spirits, not of this world. They were there, amidst the flames and laments, not to cause the accident. No, that had been caused by human choices, but to feed on the chaos, to amplify it, to infest vulnerable spirits with fear and despair. I turned to Jesus, and my soul trembled. I wanted to ask him why. I wanted to beg for answers, but I couldn't speak. And it was then that his voice reached me. It wasn't a sound. It was a wave. I didn't hear it with my ears, but with my whole being. And he said, "Sanjay, what you have seen is not a simple accident. It is the result of many choices, of many omissions. It is the harvest of what the world has sown, and the time of warnings is coming to an end." I felt cold and fire together. I perceived that I would not go back without understanding, without seeing what few see, and that what I was experiencing was not my end, but the beginning of a mission. When Jesus' voice subsided, the light around me seemed to condense into a new vision. I didn't move. Instead, the world around me transformed, as if I were being transported by a higher gaze that effortlessly crossed continents, oceans, time zones, and cultural barriers. In a single instant, I found myself observing the world from above, as if floating over a living map. And as the scene focused, I knew with clarity where I was headed: the United States of America. It was as if the Spirit was telling me, "Look here, Sanjay. Here is the route." It wasn't a condemnation of an entire people, but a profound revelation about what is hidden in the centers of global power. I saw Washington, D.C., not the city of tourists, but of closed rooms, of corridors where no one enters without being chosen, of decisions that are never publicly announced. I was there, but no one could see me. I was shown an underground room, silent, windowless, where a meeting was held that would never appear in the news. There were men and women sitting around a large black glass table. They didn't speak of democracy nor freedom, but of control, of profits, of global interest disguised as international security. Their words were like smoke. smooth, calculated, empty of truth. They laughed, they toasted, they decided. And meanwhile, in another part of the world, human flesh burned inside a plane. And then I saw more. I saw how the choices made in those rooms propagated like waves, crossing seas and mountains to reach our airports, our laws, our economies. I saw the aviation multinationals. I saw the heads of large aeronautical companies making deals with those who decided international norms. I saw protocols quietly modified, safety systems simplified to save time, engineers silenced, and entire countries, like mine, pressured to sign contracts without having a say. Everything appeared technical, but behind every choice, behind every number, there was a spirit, an influence, an invisible voice that guided powerful men to prefer money over truth. Jesus, who stood beside me, did not look with hatred, but with deep bitterness. He said to me, "This is Babylon, Sanjay, and it has no single face. It is not a nation, but a spirit that lurks where the heart of man bends to power instead of to God." I then understood that America was not evil in itself, but had been used, or worse, had allowed itself to be used, to set the pace for a world that was drifting further and further from the light. It was not just a political or economic issue. It was spiritual. Behind every visible collapse, like the Boeing 787 that crashed that day, there is an invisible and more dangerous collapse, that of collective consciousness. And Jesus showed me another image. I saw an airport, but it was empty. The runways were sterile, without movement. But beneath the surface, as beneath a skin hiding an infection, shadow creatures stirred, deceptive spirits whispering to decision-makers, "Accelerate, reduce, cut, ignore." There were no shouts, only compromises, and each seemed small, insignificant, but together they created the perfect environment for disaster to happen. "They don't need to sabotage the plane," Jesus told me. "They just need to lead the human heart to close its eyes." Then I understood. The Boeing 787 disaster was not an accident. It was the sum of 1,000 corrupted choices, some made in the United States, others in my country, still others in places I will never know, but all united by a single root, the turning away from truth, from justice, from God. And as I remained silent, devastated by what I had seen, Jesus looked up towards the spiritual horizon, and his words were etched into my soul. What happens in the heavens is always preceded by what happens in the hearts. After seeing what moves in the halls of power, I thought nothing could surprise me anymore, that my heart was now saturated with bitterness, incapable of receiving anything but indignation and dismay. I had observed the darkness that invisibly snakes through the folds of global systems, and I had felt on my skin the gravity of a world slipping into darkness without realizing it. But Jesus, who stood beside me, never taking his gaze from me, knew that my soul also needed to see the light, not the artificial light of skyscrapers or spotlights, but the light that originates from the hearts of men, invisible to the eyes of the world, yet infinitely visible to heaven. It was then that the vision changed again. The darkness that enveloped cities, governments, and corrupt systems began to show subtle cracks, like fissures in a black wall. From these cracks emanated small lights, flickering, sometimes weak like embers about to die out, others more intense like lanterns in the wind. These lights were everywhere, in the most remote villages of India, in the dusty suburbs of Africa, in the forgotten peripheries of Latin America, and even among the shadows of Western metropolises, amidst towering buildings and lost souls. They were men and women who prayed, who loved God with simplicity, who resisted evil without proclamations, without power, without fanfare. Jesus pointed to one light in particular, and immediately I saw a tiny, almost bare room with a mattress on the floor and a barred window through which the morning light entered. There, kneeling, was an elderly woman. Her hair was ash gray, her back hunched, her hands clasped. She whispered words in a language I didn't know, but heaven understood them. She prayed. She prayed for the world, for her country, for the young, for sinners, for those who live without knowing they are in danger. Every word that came from her lips transformed into a tiny flame of light, and that light pushed back the darkness around the city. No one knew she existed. No one would ever thank her. Yet, she was holding up the wall. Then I saw a dilapidated church in a rural region where poverty was palpable. Inside, a handful of faithful sang softly, without instruments, without amplifiers, but with hearts full of hope. Their singing not only rose towards the ruined ceiling but penetrated the sky. Around them, in the visible world, there was nothing special. But in the spiritual world, they seemed like warriors, small, yes, but steadfast, and their faith was armor that no occult power could penetrate. I saw a young father forego a corrupt opportunity so as not to betray his conscience. I saw an exhausted mother read a passage of scripture to her sleeping child, unaware that those words would be eternal seeds. I saw an engineer who, instead of lying to please superiors, told the truth, even knowing he would lose the contract. And beside each of them, in the unseen reality, stood angels. Not the romantic ones from postcards, but pure beings, with wings that moved not in the wind, but in the will of God. They were there because those people had chosen the truth, and heaven protected those who chose to stand firm while everyone else bent. Jesus spoke to me again, and his voice was a mix of sweetness and authority. Without them, Sanjay, the world would already have been delivered to darkness. They are few, but they are steadfast. They are forgotten, but I know them. They are despised, but they are my invisible army. Their intercession holds back judgment. Their faithfulness makes the foundations of hell tremble. I cried, not from pain, but from shame. I had always believed that power belonged to the rich, to politicians, to commanders, to those who made decisions for millions. Instead, the true strength of the world was not in palaces, but in secrets, in gestures no one sees, in moral decisions made in silence, in prayers whispered at dawn or at night. And among those small flames, Jesus showed me some faces I knew. A colleague I had mocked for his faith. A neighbor who, in silence, had prayed for me. My grandmother, dead for years, but whose prayers had never died and still fought for my soul in the invisible realm. Those lights, those souls, those small flames, they were the foundations of the world. And I had never realized it. I thought the vision of faithful souls was the culmination of the revelation. My heart was full, exhausted yet burning, as if every part of my consciousness had been flayed and then covered in fire and light. But Jesus, who walked with me through these dimensions that eluded time and space, was not yet finished showing me. He stopped. He looked at me with eyes in which the authority of the King and the tenderness of the Father coexisted. Then he extended his hand before him. Immediately the scenario changed, as if the veil of eternity was torn open again. And I saw two roads, two futures, two possibilities, a collective choice that had not yet been made, and the time to make it was thinning like sand slipping from an open fist. The first vision pierced me. It was a devastated world, yet strangely recognizable. The cities I knew, Delhi, Mumbai, New York, Paris, were still there, but they seemed emptied, like shells of civilization that had lost their soul. I saw riots in the streets, People walked with dull eyes, without trust, without memory. The violence was not just physical, it was spiritual. It was in the air. Families were divided. Generations looked at each other with suspicion. Children grew up not knowing what truth was. Schools taught lies packaged as freedom. Churches, once lighthouses, had become theaters, where people spoke so as not to disturb, where sin was silenced and grace was sold out to please the masses. I saw spiritual leaders who had sold the word to remain popular, and others who, intimidated, had retreated into silence, while the world cried out for the desperate need of prophecy. Then I saw the heavens. It wasn't over. More planes were falling, not only in India, disasters everywhere. I saw America struck by unprecedented storms, earthquakes in lands believed safe, cities submerged by water, fire devouring entire neighborhoods, famines, new diseases, meteorite fragments crossing the sky like ignored warnings. But what terrified me wasn't the destruction. It was the apathy with which people embraced it. There were no prayers, only screens, complaints, and mutual accusations. Then Jesus showed me a secret council in the heart of Washington, where powerful figures laughed as they signed hidden agreements. They are preparing a system, he explained to me, a new global order, not to save humanity, but to dominate it through chaos. And then I saw something that broke me. A war, not abroad. On Western soil, India was not excluded, but the epicenter was elsewhere. The United States, the land that had exported freedom, now burned. Brother against brother. The streets filled with blood. Cities became red zones. And then the sky darkened. But it wasn't just smoke. It was a spiritual darkness descending, as if humanity had legally given permission for darkness to enter. I trembled. Lord, is this the end? I asked him in a whisper. But he didn't answer. He just made a gesture, and the scene changed. A new vision opened before me, and this time I saw hope. It was the same earth, but different. The cities were simple, alive, not perfect, but visibly transformed. Families prayed. Parents taught their children to distinguish good from evil. Schools spoke of integrity. Churches were full, but not with spectators, with awakened souls, thirsty for truth. Pastors preached with fire, not out of fear, but out of love. The streets were still marked by poverty, but there was sharing, dignity, and authentic brotherhood. Young people sought God more than fame. The elderly recounted testimonies instead of regrets. And I also saw miracles. Not the exaggerated, showy ones, but real, profound, silent ones. I saw tumors dissolve during a prayer in a kitchen. I saw the blind regain their sight in a mud hut. I saw families reconcile with a single embrace. And I saw courageous men and women lead nations with knees bent to the ground and clean hands. This is the future I desire, Jesus said. But it requires repentance. It requires courage. It requires souls willing to lose everything so as not to lose me. I turned to him, tears streaming down a face I no longer had, and I just said, "Is there still time?" He looked at me, serious, solemn, and replied with a voice that still echoes in my spirit today. "The window is closing, Sanjay. The choice must be made now." Returning to my body was like falling into a shell that no longer belonged to me. Pain greeted me with sudden violence. My chest felt crushed by a boulder. The air was dense, sounds confused. I heard voices stirring around me, felt hands touching me, needles piercing my skin, but my mind was still elsewhere. A medical voice shouted my name, but in that instant, I was searching for another voice. His, which, just a breath before, had revealed the truth about the world to me. I opened my eyes, and the emergency room neon light pierced me like a false light. I was back. Yet, everything had changed. The doctors said I had suffered cardiac arrest and had been clinically dead for about 5 minutes. 5 minutes, they said. But I had experienced something that went far beyond human time. I had crossed eternity. I had walked beside the Lord of Life. I had seen the Boeing 787 disaster not just as a tragic event, but as a prophetic cry rising from the heart of the earth to heaven, ignored by those who stubbornly live as if the soul does not exist. The following days were a struggle. My body recovered slowly, but inside I burned. I had an urgency, a weight I couldn't shake off. Every hour I spent without speaking of what I had seen seemed like a fault. But it wasn't simple. I tried to tell my wife about my experience. She listened attentively, but her eyes were full of fear. Not for what I had seen, but for the fear that I was going crazy. I tried with my children, with my colleagues, with the pastor of my small neighborhood church. Some believed me, others shook their heads with a forced smile. Still others crossed themselves, but only to ward off something that made them uncomfortable. I understood a painful truth. Not everyone wants the truth. Some prefer the familiar noise of the world, even if it leads them to destruction, rather than listening to a message that forces them to change. But I couldn't remain silent. Jesus had told me that the time for warnings was running out, and that the world had reached a crossroads. The Boeing 787 disaster, the pain of the families, the flames in the skies, were not just events. They were signs, spiritual wounds, heavenly alarms. It was no longer enough to improve safety protocols or write new regulations. The evil I had seen did not stem from a technical defect, but from a rotten spiritual root: compromise, falsehood, indifference. So I began to write everything down. Every vision, every word heard, every image imprinted on my soul. Not for fame, not to attract attention, but because I felt it was my duty to testify. I went to my pastor and asked him to let me speak to the community. He gave me 20 minutes. I used 40. I told everything. My death, the encounter with Jesus, the 2 visions of the future, the spiritual war that surrounds us. In the end, in the hall, there was no sound. Some wept, others stared blankly. Some left skeptically, but others approached, trembling. One told me, "My heart felt you were telling the truth, even if my mind doesn't know how to accept it. It was there I understood. I don't have to convince anyone. I just have to tell, to obey, to sow. The rest is not up to me." I started speaking in small groups, in private homes, in schools. I recorded a video, which unexpectedly began to circulate. Some people started praying again after years. Others wrote to me saying they had stopped believing, but something in my words had deeply shaken them. They weren't numbers, they weren't crowds, they were souls. And for every soul awakened, the darkness receded a little. But even today, as I walk the streets of my city, I feel the urgency within me as if it were the first day. I feel the Spirit whispering that other signs will come, and that the next might not be a plane, but a city, a nation, an entire generation. Time is short. The 2 paths are still before us. The window is closing. Souls are tired, confused, but thirsty. And whoever has seen, who has truly seen, cannot remain silent. I am not a prophet. I am not a hero. I am a man who died for 5 minutes. But in those 5 minutes, Jesus showed me the heart of the world, and that heart is failing. But not all is lost. because there are still flames, there is still prayer, there is still hope, and as long as I have breath, I will tell everyone, don't wait for the next disaster to change. The awakening begins now. The return begins today. Don't be afraid of the truth. Be afraid only of living without it. With all our hearts, we thank you for staying with us until the end of this testimony. If you are still here, it's because something, perhaps a word, perhaps a vision, has deeply touched your spirit. And this is no coincidence. Now we ask you for a small gesture that can create a great wave. Write in the comments which nation you are listening from, so we can pray together for your people, for your land, for an awakening that starts right from there. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Every day we share prophetic words, visions, and testimonies that are already igniting faith in thousands of hearts. But above all, don't keep this testimony to yourself. Share it with at least 3 people you love: friends, relatives, members of your church, or anyone who has drifted away from God. A simple gesture can rekindle hope, break inner chains, and bring a soul back into the Father's arms.